thing on this. We started out thinking that agriculture would be part of industrial energy efficiency because you really think of a lot of what happens with agriculture being more of an industry area. But once that team committee met, they decided that agricultural energy efficiency had enough of its own importance that it separated out as its own team committee. So today I have, that will each be taking turns going through their team and their recommendations. From buildings is Shawnee Larson with GSBS Architects, and she was co-chair on that team committee. On transportation, it's G.J. Levanti from Utah Transit Authority. Industrial is our good friend Patty Case from ETC Group. Agriculture is Craig Butters with the Department of Agriculture and Food at the state. And public outreach is Sunny Dent from the National Energy Foundation. So I thank you. If you have any questions for me later, there's my contact information. But now I'm going to turn it over to Shawnee.
So as Larry said, this was a consensus-based approach, and it was a volunteer operation, which means no one was paid for their time, and people worked really hard, I think, to put in a lot of time to try to create this consensus approach. But that also meant that we had a lot of different interests and backgrounds, and our group had interests from, and I'll kind of just read off what they were. We had people from BOMA, HBA, Utah Clean Energy, Salt Lake County, Department of Workforce Services, Oakland Construction, Salt Lake City, GSBS Architects. We had DFCM, IHC, Questar, Utah State Office of Education, Nexent, and also the Office of Energy Development, of course, was our facilitating entity. The building group relied heavily on our own disciplines. So we were all kind of experts in our own field, but granted, we weren't policy experts. None of us really worked. We had some people with stints in government, but none of us were exactly policy creators. So it did make for a conversation, I think, that was interesting to us, but then also in the feedback process, which I don't know if we'll go into that, but we vetted this through the Public Service Commission and got a lot of feedback from them as well. I'm just pulling this up. So our recommendations came from a facilitation process where we thought about what was most important to us right now, and then the immediate first couple of years. So these are trying to find things that are implementable, which means they have to be something we can do in a short amount of time, and that they're cross-cutting, so they gravitate towards a large group of people. They don't just look at one building typology. Buildings use 30% of our energy, so it was a good place to look. We weren't looking at industrial. Patty will talk about that. The first recommendation we had was lead by example. It's important if the governor puts out something that he's doing it. You got to eat your own dog food. There's the Alpo kind of concept that a lot of companies use. Alpo, they have their dogs eat their own dog food, and that's a really important thing. If you're going to make other people do it, then you do it yourself. So we really wanted the state to come out very transparently and to open the doors to what they're doing and to share that, because I think actually they're doing a lot. And if you went to Sally Jewell, you realize that government doesn't do a very good job of promoting itself, but they actually are doing quite a bit under the cusp, and other people tend to jump on those trains and ride them. So it makes sense that we should be able to do that and look at what our state's doing. The other thing that really rose to the top, and we talked a lot about going above and beyond, concepts of net zero came up. What we really solidified on was that we need to understand and manage what we've got. We need to be able to get the data about our buildings, and then we need to also be able to understand how to manage all of that data and use it to do something different. So recommendation 2 is about pulling the data from the utilities. it seems like a lot of facility managers still struggle with getting this information, understanding how much their buildings are using. And maybe that doesn't seem as sexy as putting a big solar array on top of a building, but that makes sense. Can't manage what you can't measure. It's really true of buildings. And how many times do we compare what our phones do? We all know what everybody's phone can do, what the iPhone does, what the Google phone does. Do we really understand that about our buildings? No. We don't really have that kind of understanding yet. And that's what we need to get to really start to move the bar in building performance. The third recommendation was about incorporating that data then into a market transaction. If we can't make the market react to energy efficiency, then we're not going to get anywhere. So we really need to start to build in an economic value proposition into building efficiency. So that's talking about how do we educate the appraisers, how do we educate the people that sell buildings. And that was really an important target that came out and said, if we're going to do it as me, being a designer, if I'm going to build a building that's energy efficient, somebody's got to say there's value in it. It can't just be me. It can't just be the choir. It's got to be the people that make those transactions, that value buildings on a day-to-day basis. So that's a lot about education and how we're appraising, working with the Appraisal Institute to do that. The fourth recommendation is about supporting PACE. Does everybody know what PACE is, or does anyone know what PACE is? PACE was a bill passed that really could be a good vehicle. What it does is it allows a building owner to say, I'm going to buy this piece of energy efficiency equipment, and I'm not going to take out a loan. It's going to be a tax assessment. So that the value of that efficiency measure stays with the property. It's really building, again, trying to build in the economic backing to all of the energy efficiency that we're trying to gather. And it's something that was passed last year. It needs education. It needs people to understand how to use that as a vehicle and how to implement it in a big way so that we get a lot of traction out of it. So that when we do fight for these kinds of bills, there gets to be use out of them so that we can fight for more bills to expand on those programs. The fifth recommendation was about a benchmarking challenge for both residential and commercial. People like competitions. We want there to be a slow-to-flow equivalent campaign for buildings. Slow-to-flow has been a very effective message in terms of how do we deal with water. We understand that we have a dry state. I think those are really clear messages that the government has sent, and we need to do the same thing for our buildings. And that would be for K through 12. We look at it for private. BOMA has a program. There are a lot of models that we can use to expand on and to motivate people through competition. People like to win. It's a good way to motivate people behavior. Recommendation 6 was, and just to have it, I think the building company had the most recommendations, so I'm the longest. Sorry about that. We also understand that maybe we're not always meeting the code as it is. Like, we actually need to just do the bare minimum. So the last two recommendations are about making sure that we implement the code, that we actually do what we say we're going to do. There's a lot of good things that will help buildings be more efficient. We just need the industry to make sure they're getting done. The last recommendation is about looking at our future energy codes. And I don't know how many people in this room understand how our energy code adoption has changed in the last 5 to 6 years. That used to be more of a committee process. It's now a more political process, where that is really done by the legislature fully. And we need to have people come to the table and say why they think energy code adoption is important. And we also need to prove that there's a value there so that we're not damaging one industry through that process. And that was really a balanced conversation that we had between both the people that implement the codes and make them amended by building, as well as the people that benefit from that process. Those are basically the 7 recommendations for buildings.
And again, my name is G.J. Labonte. I'm with the Utah Transit Authority. I'm the manager for the Long Range and Strategic Planning Department at the agency. And I had a lot of fun participating in this particular exercise because it brought together a unique group of people from both the private and the public sector. So I was sitting at the table with some of the energy providers, some of the vendors of the equipment, and aftermarket installation equipment and things like that, as well as some of my peers in the state agencies. So it was a great exercise. And I think we came up with some pretty robust recommendations. We had 6, so we were second to Chamonix in terms of the sheer quantity. But like she said, so recommendation 1 was addressing fleet management issues. And as Chamonix mentioned, what needs to happen first is the government, state government especially, needs to lead by example. And so, and they are actually, as we speak, managing their fleet to both right-size and switch out on fleet turnover for more fuel-efficient vehicles, and as well as trip plans for each individual state department. I'll talk about the TravelWise program here in a second. But the governor last year issued a statement to all department heads that they were to report back to him on how each individual department was strategically reducing the number of trips that their employees in the department were making. So fleet sizing, fleet management was recommendation 1. Recommendation 2 was, there's 2, recommendations 2 and 3, both have to do with alternative transportation. And the first one was really about the infrastructure for alternative transportation, namely fueling. So gas, CNG fueling infrastructure, electric charging infrastructure. One of the points that came up that was particularly salient to me was truck idling at truck stops. I guess a lot of truck stops have recently implemented an option for cab drivers to plug their cabs and their freezer units, if they have one, into local electric charging stations, and so they're not sitting there idling for 8-10 hours at a time. But that infrastructure doesn't exist in a lot of places. The third recommendation was, again, alternative transportation, but this time through the private sector. So we're talking about either incentivizing or some other way, getting corporations and businesses to think about innovation in a way that helps their bottom line. That could be through incentive programs to encourage their employees to use mass transportation, employees incentives for alternative fuel vehicle purchases. We talked about the chambers of commerce offering member discounts for those companies that were willing to take that on. The Salt Lake Chamber has created a Clean Air Partner program, which has really become quite a success, and now it's climbed the hill and reached the point where now members look at that as kind of a badge of honor, and a lot of them have signed on. It's not a particularly stringent criteria to keep up with the program. They just have to make a few commitments that they're going to do and share with their employees. But they're taking the lead, and one of my favorites is Overstock.com. Jonathan Johnson is the president of Overstock, sits on that Clean Air Committee, and he takes it seriously. He gets ramped up for the bike Clear the Air challenge every year, and puts the gauntlet down for all of his employees to be the best company out there in that particular challenge. The fourth recommendation was this expanded TravelWise program. And how about by a show of hands? How many people know what the TravelWise program is? Okay, a few. It's a program implemented and instituted by UDOT that basically educates consumers, businesses, and private citizens, but they have a business package that they can take into a company and talk to them about these alternatives. So it's they call that when you shift times in your work. Flex time for employees, commuting options, carpooling, van pooling, transit passes. The state just purchased the statewide, or not statewide, but at least along the Wasatch Front, an employee pass for every one of their people. So I can't remember how many people that is. I think it was about 12 or 13,000 people now, all have state transit pass to use. So TravelWise, it's a program that we think should be brought out, and I think it should be educated or brought to the schools at the primary level. primary education, so the kids are talking about it with their parents. Recommendation 5 was one of my favorites here, support multi-use districts located by mass transit hubs. That's a long-winded sentence for transit-oriented development. And if you're not familiar with that, it's really about land use planning, so working with local governments to think about opportunities near the new transit stations. We just completed a $2.5 billion program of rail projects last year. I don't know the exact number of stations off the top of my head, but it's in the low 50s or 60s. I mean, high 50s or 60s, I can't remember exactly. So those are opportunities now for communities to think about what they want, especially if it's greenfield development around those stations. We just got done with a really fun land use exercise with American Fork City. All greenfield development. The landowners are interested in selling. The city wants to control kind of how that land is developed so they don't get more straw in their community. And the last recommendation was to expand community-based alternative methods of transportation. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Green Bike program down in Salt Lake City. It's a recently, I think they launched last spring. It's a really cool program. I have a pass right here. I use it quite frequently to get across town. So, and I have a free transit pass too. So this is one of the ways I go out, and I can get across town on these green bikes, and you're riding from hub to hub. So I'm docked at one station, which is located right outside my office. I can ride over to City Creek Center or over to the Salt Lake City County building, dock it there, and then I'm guaranteed there'll be a bike there when I come back and ride it back to my office. So that's just one mode. We're talking about, I also have another card buried deep in here with Enterprise Car Share. Now they have partnered with us to have cars at all of our tracks and front-runner stations. So now if I have a meeting down in Norton, I can go take front-runner down, pull out my car, swipe it, get in a car, and drive to my meeting in Norton without really having to put another car on the road. So those are some of the alternative methods of transportation that we're talking about. And so I'm going to close right there with that last recommendation and pass to the next one.
Hi, I'm Patty Case with ETC Group. We're an engineering firm in Salt Lake City. And I've been leading the industrial practice for ETC Group for about 25 years now. The Industrial Energy Efficiency Group, I'm not going to put a slide up. I have a slide that was going to remind me of all the points, but I think I can remember them. The group that was convened by the state energy office, they act as facilitators, not as leaders. And that included a stunning amount of expertise, I would say. The group included energy efficiency experts from both the end-use sector, some of the biggest industrial energy users in the state, as well as engineering firms that have been doing industrial energy efficiency work with clients all over the world for a long period of time, to Salt Lake Community College's Green Academy Energy Efficiency Management Program curriculum director, I think you'd call him, to utilities, to who else was there? End users, utilities, and manufacturers, people who actually make equipment that industrial end users would be using for energy efficiency projects. So it's an interesting group, and one of my peers said, you know, what's blocking energy efficiency in the industrial sector are two things: money and time, or money, knowledge, and time. And the recommendations that the group came up with really sort of address those things. Two of them are aimed at money. The first recommendation is to do some kind of a tax incentive for industrial energy efficiency projects, so that that would encourage, that would help get over the hurdle of finding the money to do what might be a very attractive project. Industry has a very internal capital-intensive project development process. Typically, you'll find that an industrial end user is much more interested in spending money on something that will allow them to make more product than in spending money on something that will allow them to save money. So addressing that money issue, that capital issue, was the basis of two of the recommendations. One of the recommendations was a tax incentive. The second recommendation was for a revolving loan program to allow the state to run a program similar to what they're doing for public sector entities, where industry could come and get money at a more attractive interest rate. And maybe even more important than the attractive interest rate is that it's just there. There's actual capital available. So those two recommendations were aimed at looking at money. The next two are aimed at looking at the people knowledge challenge associated with it. And one of them is to expand education and training for industrial energy efficiency. One of the challenges is figuring out what to do. Identifying efficiency opportunities, figuring out what to do, and then figuring out how to make them happen. So one recommendation is to expand education and training. The second recommendation is to issue a challenge to the industries in the state to develop energy management plans. Plans that are top-down led or top-down supported, I would say, that look at creating long-term plans for tracking and then saving energy in industrial facilities. The idea here in part is that the state can participate in helping to convene peer groups. So it would be developing energy management plans and then sharing those plans with their peers, the leaders, mentoring the newbies, and everybody sharing best practices. And then the fifth recommendation is to create a combined heat and power policy working group. How many here know what combined heat and power is? Everybody? Not quite. Okay, since there's at least one person in the room, I get to explain what combined heat and power is. Combined heat power is what used to be called cogeneration, and it is using a single source of fuel to provide both electricity and useful thermal or mechanical energy at the same time, typically at the same site. One of the reasons that combined heat and power is in this efficiency package is that our typical electrical generation system, you may or may not know, is about 30% efficient, which means for every unit of energy that goes in at the power plant, you get about a third of one at your light switch. And the CHP system can be something on the order of 60, 70, possibly even 80% efficient. So that's why it's in the efficiency package. The working group would be looking at policies and practices to facilitate and encourage the development and installation of CHP systems in the state. So those are the 5 industrial efficiency recommendations. Oh, okay, you should have a handout in your, or maybe some of you got the handout. I forgot to mention, the Department of Energy is actually providing some technical assistance for free for projects or end users who might be interested in looking at the CHP system, and that's what your handout's about. And there's a link there to a website for the Department of Energy Combined Heat and Power Technical Assistance Partnership in the Southwest. ETC Group is one of the technical assistance providers for that program.
Hello. I hope you've had an enjoyable day here with your sustainability conference. My name is Craig Butters, and I'm representing the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. I've been working there since about September. This is one of my first responsibilities I was given when I was working there as a part-time employee. And I work full-time on my own dairy farm in Cache County. So I got a full-time job that takes most of my time, and then I spend some time with the State Department of Agriculture. I'm enjoying both. Agriculture has been a big part of my life, and I'd just like to give you a little bit of background about agriculture in the state of Utah. The department recently did a survey where they asked respondents if they agree or strongly agree or disagree basically with the concept of agriculture being important in the state's future. And 95% of the respondents in this survey, 400 people along the Wasatch Fronts, stated that they agree that agriculture is important in the state's future. Utah agriculture production and processing accounts for $17.5 billion in total economic activity in the state. And that's about 14.1% of the state's total gross domestic product. The agriculture sector employs nearly 80,000 workers and contributes $2.7 billion to the local wages. And so agriculture also generates about $285 million in state and local taxes. So just to give you a background, agriculture is important in Utah. Maybe not as important as some other states, but it is still important in Utah. And as we see the movement towards people wanting more locally grown and produced foods, processed foods, fewer processed foods, it's going to become more important in the state. Now, when energy prices fluctuate, of course, it has a great effect on the farm economy, especially in small communities. Right now, we're at a time when Utah's farmers and ranchers are looking at ways that they can remain sustainable. And so, in our work as an agriculture committee, we were trying to focus on things that would be readily accepted by agricultural producers and could have a big impact on these farms and help them to become more sustainable. The recommendations that we came up with basically under 4 fairly broad themes. They are programs and partnerships, education, finances and incentives, and technology. We came up with 3 recommendations that address these 4 different themes for recommendations. So the first recommendation I have is to create a unified partnership to establish collaboration with the people that are involved here. And we call it the Energy Agriculture Team with the what do you call it? Acronym EAT. The acronym EAT. So we felt like that was one of the most brilliant things that we came up with as a committee, was the acronym EAT. The Energy Agriculture Team would be represented by key stakeholders, partners in the local, state, and federal government, public, private utilities, nonprofits, private sector, and farmers and ranchers. The agriculture-based community would be more likely to accept and adopt programs that are voluntary, incentive-based, and promoted and administered by local outreach individuals, such as your soil conservation districts, Farm Bureau, and other groups like that. One of the concerns we have is someone from the state or the federal government going to the agriculture producers saying, I'm here to help you save energy, because most, well, I'm not going to say most, but there are some agriculture producers that have a little skepticism toward the state and federal government. So we felt like it was important to get people involved who were neighbors, who were familiar with these individuals, that they trusted, and that could provide them with information to help them understand how energy efficiency can benefit their operations. So that was recommendation number 1, is to create this unified partnership. Number 2 is to provide a statewide outreach and training. And what we consider important here is that
we have a statewide reach for training workshops to be provided to the agricultural producers so that they can go learn about what options are available in energy savings on their operations. And we have communicated with the Utah State University Extension. They do have a statewide reach, and it just felt like this was a natural fit to have them become involved in this process. So they will be working with the energy agricultural team in providing these workshops throughout the state. And education and training in these workshops would be presented in the form of basically workshops, brochures, also demonstration farms or pilot programs, things like that can be used to promote the energy efficiency plans. Recommendation number 3 is to come up with funding, a reliable funding source, and some producer incentives. We have programs in the state that are revolving loan funds for other things such as water conservation projects, things similar to what we would be doing with the energy conservation. So it was felt that that would be a good fit there to come up with some type of revolving loan fund that ag producers could benefit from to make important changes in their operations. And so basically that's the recommendations that we came up with, and felt like these recommendations could help the agricultural producers in the state.
Good afternoon, almost good night. I can tell we're kind of getting to that point at the end of the day where you can get a little sleepy and ready to be done. And I compliment you all on sticking around this long. Our group, first of all, I'm Sunny Dent. I'm with the National Energy Foundation, and the group that I was a part of is the Public Outreach and Education. So we're the great big umbrella that covers everything else that these specialized groups do not cover. We basically cover your common everyday Utah. You, I do not consider to be part of that group. The fact that you are at this conference means you actually stop to think about sustainability. And sustainability, you can't talk sustainability without talking energy. So consequently, I don't really consider you to be part of the greater group that never thinks about energy. At National Energy Foundation, we actually, our mission is to cultivate and promote an energy literate society, and we actually go about teaching students in school to, number 1, think energy, number 2, talk about energy, and number 3, take action about energy. So, in the Public Outreach and Education group, we're looking for that common citizen that lives amongst us that actually doesn't think energy. In fact, what we know at the foundation are that most people, most of us out there, only think about energy when we have to fill up our tank of our car or pay our utility bill. And that is generally what we find. So we want to make connections through the Public Outreach and Education Plan. We want to actually expand awareness and improve implementation of energy efficiency and conservation programs. And so we came up with 4 themes and 5 recommendations to support those themes. And our themes had to do with identifying very concrete goals, measurable goals, and identifying outcomes that were awareness versus an actual action. Then we wanted to talk about convenience. Things have to be easier. People don't do them in today's world. We wanted to demonstrate value and effectiveness, basically return on investment. And we wanted to be able to leverage social motivators through challenges, competitions, get people thinking about all various audiences we might be able to motivate to make some changes. As I stated, in our particular instance, we really focus on K-12 students in schools. So consequently, we've given you an example of what might happen when we go into schools. So if you didn't get this poster, if you'd like any extra ones, Denise has them down here at the table. But at any rate, you're going to find that our committee represented everything from our major utility companies in the state to our small municipal utilities in the state, which we have about 7, I think, 7? I'm sorry, we have about 30. We have about 23 UMs members and about 7 UNPOM members. So we have about 30 munis in the state. So we had utility representation. We had PR and media groups as part of our group. We had technical colleges and community colleges. They do a lot of the technical training that put people to work in the energy industry at a fast pace. They were part of our group. And we had workforce services part of our group, as well as other nonprofits such as ourselves. So our recommendations to attack these themes included, first of all and foremost, to develop a governor-led education initiative on energy efficiency and conservation. Now, we already see some of these umbrella initiatives happening. Clear the Air is one of them. Slow the Flow is one of them. The Clean Air Challenge is one of them. So we were looking for some kind of a branded message where everything relative to energy efficiency could maybe find its way under that umbrella throughout the state. This would act as a clearinghouse or a centralized resource for people. Because if you live in Morgan City, I'm not sure you know what your options are for energy efficiency through your utility outlet there. If you're, on the other hand, if you have Rocky Mountain Power, there's billboards all along I-15 that direct you to what's smart. And you maybe can find out pretty quickly what your options are. Well, under this governor-led brand, all of that, all citizens would have an opportunity to see what the resources were. And within that, we would catalog those resources and share best practices. We would showcase programs we would recommend that under this plan. We would also support all the various different initiatives that are going on, and whether they were in higher ed or in an industry or transportation in the public sector or the school districts. For instance, some of the best schools in the state relative to energy efficiency are in Davis County. Do you know that? Does the basic Utah know that? We have the most Energy Star-labeled K-12 schools in Davis County, Utah. That's our lead county. So I don't know that even the parent who sends their child out to school at Northridge High knows that every day. Another recommendation we would do would be to have challenges. Patty mentioned that a little bit in the industrial arena. Challenges between the various arenas, perhaps between universities, the schools, and so on. We can tell you one of the challenges we were involved with this last year was actually led by Ian, my colleague over here with the camera. As his master's thesis was actually conducted at USU Eastern down in Price, where he challenged dormitories to an energy efficiency duel. And in the spring semester a year ago, he trained them, provided them tools and resources, and challenged students in this dorm versus that dorm to be more energy efficient. We've been involved with projects like that in various places around the country. So finally, our last one was to offer training opportunities. As I said, several of the members of our team were part of the UCAT system, the technical colleges, the community colleges around the state. And they have great programs for people to get people into the energy industry. And this is one of the challenges. Secretary Jewell talked today a little bit about the generational thing going on. I'm part of that boomer generation, the silver tsunami that's about to depart. And to backfill the energy industry jobs, will require a great deal of education. So organizations such as ours start in the K-12 sector to try to encourage students to start thinking energy. And they in turn go home, talk to mom and dad, neighbors, grandparents, aunts and uncles, and we have changes being made. Our plan says, let's do more of that. Let's do it to all the audiences, whether they're in higher ed, whether they're relative to senior citizens, low-income folks, rural versus the Wasatch Front, to get the message out through a public education and outreach plan led by the governor to all Utahns.
So I think we have some time for questions, right? And I do want to say from the Office of Energy Development, a big thank you to our speakers. You don't know how awesome these people have been through this whole process, so a big thank you to you guys. Any questions? So the question is, when we have the plan out for public comment, then what's the next step? Well, one of the things I'm hoping with the public comment period is that we all report it back up to the steering committee. And it would be really nice to take back to the steering committee a broader statement, don't you think? Do you want to address that? You were talking to me about that. What you would like to hear?
I think that this consensus-based process led us to what we thought was palatable, what we thought would be implementable right now. But I think that there are a lot of things that we see individual industries doing that can be replicated. And it would be great to hear what people are doing already, because I think those examples of success make it so much easier to build off of and to progress. Our firm can design a net zero building. We can't do it because our client tells us to do it. So we need that person to come to the table and say, I want to go that direction. I want to start planning my building that way. And I think everybody on the panel would agree that there's a lot of people out there that are doing things every day that are pretty fantastic that we want to hear from. But I think also, hearing what's possible. I've already done this. I'm an appraiser and I've already appraised a building and I figured out how to value it, and we should just follow this model. We don't have to retool and retool it. Here's a good example, and I think that's the lead by example, and this clearinghouse concept that hopefully will come out of this process so that there is a place for all of those important examples to be able to be capitalized on.
What role do you foresee for the education sector in this process, both K-12 and higher education, in terms of building cultural awareness with this in schools, but also in terms of making the resources available to companies who want to train people to understand better the issues, the practices, certifications? Do you plan on making any recommendations that really cut across all of the sectors in terms of the role of higher ed?
One of our strategic alliances as a national nonprofit is with the Center for Energy Workforce Development. It's housed in Washington, D.C. It was put together by the Edison Electric Institute, which represents all the utility companies, the American Gas Association, which represents all the natural gas companies, and the Nuclear Energy Institute, which represents all the nuclear energy producers across the country. If one were to go to, is it CEWD.org? CEWD.org, you would actually learn about what I was saying a moment ago, what the workforce needs are in energy going forward. So, see, right here we have a bunch of professionals in various specific industries. Well, I'm guessing they all went to college. And I'm guessing they all have background. Higher ed prepared them for what they contributed to society. Well, on CEWD, people from higher education could actually see what the energy industry is saying they foresee they need. And you'll see that there are universities all over the nation that are partners with them and are focusing in on some of those specific needs. And, you know, we've got great young people out there that are going to be prepared, and they're going to come to places like Weaver State and fill these needs. So when it comes to young people and education, it's about the future.
So I had mentioned the TravelWise program, which is actually run by UDOT, and they have a broad spectrum of outreach. They go through young to adult, but I really see that as an opportunity to educate an up-and-coming generation about alternative transportation choices. But to the academic, the higher level academic degrees, we're seeing a lot more of these planning degrees in colleges teaching about the things that I've mentioned in here, transit-oriented development, the benefits of density in clusters around some transit hubs. There's a whole generation, we're doing research in my office right now on millennials that are coming up and what their housing and transportation needs will look like for the next 10, 15 years. And it's a key research concept for a lot of academics these days. So I think it's on both ends, K through 12 and secondary, or post-secondary.
So very specifically, teach heating, ventilating, and air conditioning at the university level, teach building controls at the university level, provide internships for students who are interested in that, and teach them from the perspective of high-performance sustainable design rather than cookie cutter. And the other thing, Weaver State's doing this is walking the talk, is having standards, having goals, leading by example, making a commitment to sustainability and energy efficiency, and actually making that visible in the community. I think Weaver's doing a really good job of that.
Thank you all for coming. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate you sticking it out to the last panel of the conference. And thank you so much. We hope to see you all next year. Thank you.